Great. Okay, so again, welcome everyone. And as I mentioned, if you want to, you can mute yourself, but since it's a pretty small group of us, feel free to just stay on the line because I'd like for you to jump in and ask any questions as we move through the webinar, so feel free to do that. So let's start with introductions. So this is me. This is Lavanya Mohan. I also go by Lavi. I'm the research associate here at the Aspen Institute, and it would be great if folks on the line can also introduce themselves.
I'll get started. This is Beth Benedict. I'm the research manager at Nielsen of the team that you'll be working with.
Great.
So I'll be kind of working behind the scenes. Don't be surprised if you see me copied throughout the life of the study. Just as we kind of transition things from Ben over to our team, we want to make sure that everything goes smoothly, and I'll turn it over to Jasmine and then Devin and Sean.
Great. Do we have anybody else on the line?
Hi, this is Bernard.
Oh. Can you guys hear us okay?
Yes.
Okay. Jasmine, are you able to hear the audio?
Yeah, I can hear.
Great, great. Why don't you go ahead, Jasmine, and introduce yourself and your role, and then we can turn it over to Devin and Sean to do the same.
Sure. My name is Jasmine, and I'm based in the Ottawa office. I'll be the PM on the Nielsen side for this project. We usually run quite a few phone studies out of our office. This is the first time that we'll be working with this particular call center, but we're all looking forward to the project. Devin, are you on the line?
Devin might have been having some audio issues. I know he was messaging me on the side.
Okay.
But Lavi, so you know, in case Devin can't get in, Jasmine is the lead. We always assign a backup in case Jasmine is out or in a meeting, so Devin will be acting as her backup. He's a research analyst as well.
Okay, great.
And then Sean, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Sean. I'm working as a research analyst, and I've been working with Beth's team for more than 6 months, almost 6 months now. And I'm looking forward to work on this project and learn more moving forward. Thank you.
Now,
Great.
Jasmine and Devin have extensive Katie experience, which is why the project is aligned with them, and Sean is looped in to learn something new. So you'll see his name on the trail as well.
Great.
All right.
So is there anybody else that hasn't introduced themselves yet?
Well, this is Meg. I'm actually on the line as well. I'm with Nielsen. I'm actually with Beth's team for NOQ, but currently, Bobby, I'm doing a short-term assignment with the PMO team and working directly with Michelle Andreas.
Okay, great.
So it's actually kind of nice to be able to see both sides of this happening, one from a research analyst side with Beth and Jasmine and Devin, but also coming from the side with Michelle and Rebecca. So it's really nice to see the gaps being bridged together at this point. But I am on the line and just kind of listening in to see if there's anything that would be needed from the PM team to help facilitate anything, okay?
Great, thank you.
Yep.
All right. So let's move on. So to start off, I just wanted to provide you the list of programs that are participating in this process with Nielsen. So we have 7 participating programs. You'll be working with 4 of the Axiom sites, Lift Fund and Opportunity Fund. And I know that you'll also be working with New York City's Small Business Services team as well. They're still in the contracting process with Nielsen, but they will be getting on board soon. And so they will be using the same survey tool and the same Excel workbook as well. All right, so let's just dive into the Entrepreneur Tracker survey questions. So here's the screenshot of the Excel workbook's survey input form. I'm not sure if all of you have gotten a chance to look at the workbook as of yet, and I hope you have and kind of browse through it. We're going to spend a little bit more time towards the latter end of the webinar walking through the workbook and what pieces of it are going to be relevant to you. And what's going to happen is as you conduct your interviews, you'll be inputting the data into the survey input form and storing the data. We suggest using this particular form because it controls for a lot of errors. There are more data checks programmed into the survey input form. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I just wanted to throw this up for you. When you finish inputting data into that survey input form that we just looked at, the data will then transfer into this data editing sheet. So you're going to see each row is going to correspond to a different client's data. And this is a page that you're going to spend a lot of time on and just reviewing the data and making sure that it looks right before you send it to the programs. So now that we've done that, I kind of want to start talking about the script. So as you know, I sent you all the scripts on Friday in English and Spanish. And probably the most important part of that is the beginning of the script, which are the privacy terms. So I hope that your team can spend some time just reviewing the terms in the first two paragraphs to make sure that the privacy terms align with your contract with each of the programs. And I know the programs are doing that as well. And I just want to make sure that everyone is in agreement with the privacy terms since they'll be read out to the program clients by the Nielsen staff.
And Lavi, just to give you a status on that, we have forwarded the scripts to the internal legal counsel team who helped with the contracting piece of that, and they're reviewing on our end.
Great.
So I'm pinging them to make sure that they turn their review around as quickly as possible.
Great.
And hopefully we can hear from each of the Opportunity Axion and the Lift Fund.
The fund, yeah, great. That sounds good. Right, and I want to say that the survey script, I've tried to keep it simple, the privacy terms, but also kind of aligning to what Nielsen and the programs had agreed to. So, happy to talk more about that and to hear from your team as well as the programs and if there needs to be any changes that are made to that. So,
absolutely, we'll loop back if there are any red lines to that.
Great. So the next piece I want to talk about is the piece on anonymizing the data. So as you know, the programs are going to be sending you the names of the clients, maybe their business names when applicable, and contact information for the clients. So when this survey data is sent to the Aspen Institute, all that data is anonymized, and the way that we do that is we assign client ID numbers to a client so we can keep track of the client but still keep their information private. So what the programs are going to do is they're going to send you a list of clients with corresponding client ID numbers. And when you enter the data into this workbook, you'll want to make sure to enter the client ID number for that particular client's name so that the information is anonymized, but at the same time you know which client's name is corresponding to which client ID. And the other thing that I just quickly want to talk about is you'll see this yellow arrow here for this check for data button. So you don't have to worry about that in the survey input form because it's not relevant to the data that you're inputting. So don't worry about that check for data button. But you do want to just make sure to enter the client ID number for each client that you're surveying.
Great.
Okay, so let's start talking about the survey questions. So during the webinar, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the survey questions in groups. So the first two questions on the survey are really intended to provide data on the client's survey status, and we're asking the interviewer to tell us if you could or could not interview the client. And we also provide some choices if you could not interview the client. So the programs will provide you information on which clients are in bankruptcy or have defaulted on their loans and cannot be contacted. So these are the clients, if, as I mentioned, if they're in bankruptcy, they cannot be contacted, and you'll just indicate that for that particular client and move on to the next client that you do need to contact. So at the end of the survey campaign, there are obviously going to be clients that you weren't able to contact, right? So for those clients, you're just going to mark could not survey, don't know their business status in 2016. You don't need to worry about the last two options of maybe they had a business or did not have a business during 2016, because that's something that the programs are going to figure out. So usually the way that it works is programs who aren't able to contact certain clients, they'll just do some Google searching to figure out whether the business existed in 2016 or not. So that's something you're not going to have to worry about. You're just going to mark that we weren't able to connect with this client and we don't know their business status.
Okay. Great.
So I want to kind of talk about the dates a little bit because it can kind of be confusing at times. So in this process, what we're doing is we're surveying these programs clients who received services in fiscal year 2015. So they received a loan or they received training in 2015, and the script in the interview is asking about their 2016 experiences. So we're trying to understand what happened to them, what happened to their business, what happened to their household after receiving these services in fiscal year 2015. And of course, we're doing the survey in 2017. But most importantly, we want to make sure that we know that we're surveying clients about their 2016 experiences. And you'll see that reflected in the script as well. So I'm just going to go over that again because it can be a little bit confusing. So we're interviewing clients about the services they received in fiscal year 2015, and we're really interested in their experiences in 2016. And of course, we're conducting those interviews in 2017. But the most important is that we're trying to understand the client's business and household experiences in 2016. So let's discuss question 1. We want to know if the client borrowed funds or received services during fiscal year 2015. And this first question just confirms that the client did receive services. If the client did not receive services in 2015, just take a moment to make sure that the client understands we're asking about the fact that they received services in 2015, but we want to know about their experiences in 2016. And if the client still says they didn't receive services from this particular program, then that's the conclusion of the survey, and you'll just mark that and move on to the next client. However, this shouldn't happen since the programs have already isolated clients in their 2015 client universe. This is really more of a data check, this first question. I also want to go over some of the answer choices. In the survey input form, you're going to see some drop-down menus, and for many of the drop-down answer choices, you'll also see DK, RF, and NA answer choices. So you'll want to select DK or don't know if the client honestly doesn't know or cannot recall the information, and select RF or refuse to answer if the client doesn't want to answer a specific question, which might happen if they feel uncomfortable about answering a specific question. And the last is you may also need to select NA or not applicable if a survey question isn't relevant to a client. So for example, if the client did not have a business, all of the business-related survey questions will be not applicable to them, right? So the Excel workbook does have macros programs that will automatically add an NA or not applicable for some of the answers later in the survey based on the answers recorded at the beginning of the survey. However, there are a few places where you might manually need to enter in an NA for the answer choice.
Okay, so we'll have to keep an eye on that when we're data checking once we've entered that in to make sure that it ported properly. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
We'll keep an eye out for that.
Right. Usually it's fine. I mean, usually you'll see that most of the time the NA will just fill up for when, questions aren't relevant to that particular client. Mm-hmm.
Right. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure there are no blanks, right? So.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, good.
There may be some cases where you see a blank and you might be deciding, was this an NA or was this an RF? So yeah, you want to make sure that you've identified which it is, because it's helpful to know for the programs whether clients did refuse to answer versus it wasn't relevant to them. So the next set of questions focus on the client's priorities for seeking assistance. This is to provide programs with some qualitative information about their client experiences and expectations in the services they received, and these are more just qualitative and helpful information for the programs. The next set of questions are about the client's business. So I'm going to just pause for a second. I think I'm hearing some background noise, so if anybody has some background noise, if you could mute yourself, that would be really helpful. Okay. So coming back to this business status question, it's question 6 on the survey, and it asks if the client operated a business at any time in 2016. And if they answer yes, then you want to proceed to the follow-up question, which is question 6A, and ask them about the number of businesses they operated in 2016. And then you skip to question 8, which asks for the start date of their business. And all of these directions are also provided in the script as well, and you'll see where it tells you which question to skip to or which question to follow up with based on the client's answer. So one thing to note is we do use a standard definition of what qualifies as being in business. And that definition is that a business has made sales or taken steps towards formalization, such as, for instance, opening a business checking account. So this definition is probably a little bit broader than some organizations, but that's sort of the definition that we go by. And if you have any more questions about what qualifies as a business or not, feel free to reach out to me during the survey process. So if the client says no to question 6, meaning they did not ever operate a business at any time in 2016, you'll want to then ask the client if they ever have been in business. And if they have ever been in business, then you'll answer questions about when they started and closed their previous business, or if they're not in business in 2016 and were never in business before, then you're just going to skip questions 7 through 29 actually, and move on to the latter part of the survey. And what will happen is the workbook will automatically fill out NA because all of the business-related questions will not be relevant to that client. The other thing I want to mention is you want to, you're going to skip the NAICS code question. So in the survey, when you're asking the client about their business, you also ask them to describe their business. And when you provide that information, the programs are then going to look up the NAICS code, which is the North American something something code, which is for a way to categorize businesses, and they're going to do that when you send them the survey data. So don't worry about that NAICS code question, and I've put a line through it in the survey as well, so you don't have to ask that question or work on that. So the next set of questions are focused on the client's business. We want to know more information about the type of ownership and if the client works full-time, part-time, or seasonal. And so the way we ask that is through how many months per year they work and hours per week they typically work at their business. And just as a side note, we at the Aspen Institute define full-time as a business owner working at least 35 hours per week year-round, and we define seasonal as a business owner working 9 months or less during the year, regardless of the number of hours they worked per week. And in any case, it's not that relevant to the questions that you're asking. You're really just asking them about the number of months they work, the number of hours they work, and we will be calculating whether they're working part-time, full-time, or seasonal, because that's really helpful for the programs to know what types of businesses their clients have. Okay, so starting with question 15, we begin focusing on the monetary part of the client's business. And question 15 asks the client for their annual gross business sales in 2016. And so gross sales are the total dollar amount of sales before any expenses or taxes paid. And remember, we're asking only for their sales in 2016, not cumulatively. So this can be kind of a tough question to ask, and so you may want to probe the client and ask the question in different ways. And you can ask them how much revenue they make per month or what their total sales are typically per week. And many clients may not immediately know this number, their total gross sales in 2016. So you may want to ask them on a weekly basis or monthly basis and just have a calculator handy to calculate their annual business sales. So you're going to actually skip the following question, which is question 16, asking for clients' net profits in 2016. And this is because the programs are going to fill out this information because this information is taken from the tax forms and financial documents that the programs collect of their clients. So you're going to just skip that question, and there's a line, a strike through on this question in the script. And you are going to move on to ask the question about owner's draw, which is the income or salary the business owner takes out of their business. It's also sometimes referred to as take-home pay. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about owner's draw because it's probably the trickiest and most challenging question on the survey. And so question 17 and 18 on the survey ask the client about their owner's draw. And so owner's draw is, again, how much the client pays themselves from their business. It's the amount of money the client takes out of their business revenue or sales and uses towards household expenses. So in a sense, it is like a salary that the client takes from their revenues. It's not profits or additional money for themselves, but instead what the client takes from gross sales that goes towards their basic expenses or household expenses. So one thing to be careful of is actually using the keyword salary. Some clients may interpret salary as additional money taken out of profits, which is not the meaning of owner's draw. Really, we're just trying to understand how much money is a client taking out of their business sales and putting towards household and personal expenses. And this particular question is, as I mentioned, a little bit tricky, and sometimes clients may refuse to answer this question. So you just want to kind of reassure them that the information is confidential and try to ask this question in different ways. So one other way you could think about it is you may want to ask them, so on a weekly basis, how much money do they take out of their business revenues and put towards their household rent or food or children's expenses or other basic expenses for themselves and their family. So that's one way to think about asking that question to get at how much the client is really taking out of their sales or revenue and putting towards their personal and household expenses. So in addition to that question about owner's draw, we also want to know about the client's expectations about their owner's draw. And so question 17 and 18 ask you that question, and 19 and 24 further probe the client, trying to understand whether the owner's draw met their goals and if their expectations were met. So I'm going to pause here to see if folks have any questions because, again, owner's draw can be a little bit tricky. So just want to see if anybody has any questions before we move forward.
Hi, Lavi. It's Beth.
Hi.
You're sharing a lot of great context and how the interviewers can probe on these questions. Do you have that in your talk track here? What I'd ideally like to do is make a help sheet for the interviewers so that they don't veer too much from the script.
Sure.
The interviewers are really trained to read and probe verbatim so that they're not biasing or leading. But it sounds like with some of these questions we have a little bit more flexibility. Yeah. And I'll tap the team that worked on this last time to see if they have a help sheet they can dig up from 2015 as well. But if you have any particular notes and things that they can use for probing, what we would do is either put it up in a help sheet that they can keep right beside them or actually program it into the script so that they can see it on screen.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
we actually provide programs who do their surveying internally. We provide them a glossary that provides kind of the definition of each term and so on. And so I could probably adapt that for Nielsen and provide a little bit more specifically on owner's draw. And what we'll talk about next is employment figures.
Great. That would be really helpful to make sure that the team is really trained up and understands these definitions.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Great.
Okay, so the next piece we're going to talk about is employment, which is also a little bit tricky and challenging. So these are questions 25 through 29 in the survey, and when you look at the survey input form, the employment section does look long, but it's actually pretty easy and relatively easy to follow. So similar to business sales and owner's draw, employment figures are pretty crucial for programs as it allows them to report out really valuable information on jobs created to funders, policymakers, and other stakeholders. So similar, again, to owner's draw, it's really vital and crucial information, but again, it can be a little bit tricky to get as much information about employment from clients. So to get at this, we actually ask clients to tell us first the number of paid workers that do work for the business. And we categorize paid workers into two groups. One is paid employees and the other is paid contractors. So employees are workers who receive a W-2 tax form from their employer and are hired full-time, part-time, or seasonally. And contractors are workers who receive a 1099 tax form from the company for which they work. And contractors are usually paid hourly or by a job or project. So one additional note on contractors. If the business is, for example, a cupcake bakery and what we're really trying to understand is we're not asking you to count the consultant hired to design their website, but if the baker has a 1099 contractor that's making decorations for the baked goods, then they would be counted. So really you're only counting contractors that are directly related to the sales of the business. Okay, so let's talk about 25 and 26, which specifically ask about clients or business owners' paid employees. So again, employees are workers that receive a W-2 tax form from the client, who is a business owner, and you must record the employee's hourly wage, whether the employee is part-time or full-time, and the number of months they worked for the client at their business. And then moving on and talking about questions 27 and 28, these specifically ask about the client or business owner's paid contractors. And again, contractors are workers who receive a 1099 tax form and are paid hourly or by the job or project. So when you ask the business owner about their contractors, you're going to ask them whether they're paid hourly or by the job. If they are paid hourly, then you want to include their hourly wage. If they're paid by the job or project, you're just going to enter NA or DK and move on because it's too difficult to sort of figure out what by the job or project means, because really we want to try to categorize the data into an hourly wage, which is useful when we calculate jobs numbers and employment figures. And you'll see in the Excel workbook survey input page that there's room to enter up to 10 paid employees and 10 contractors. And if the client or business owner has more than 10 paid employees or contractors, their survey has a section to add these additional paid workers. So again, I'm going to stop here to see if anybody has any questions.
This is Beth. I think we're okay right now.
Okay, good. All right. So let's move on to the next section. So the next section of the survey asks questions that are less focused on the client's business and more focused on their employment and household details outside of their business. So question 30 to 32 are asking if the client also worked another job outside of their current business. And if they did work another job, we want to know if they worked part-time or full-time and what their annual pre-tax earnings were from this job. Then questions 33 to 38 serve a couple of different purposes. With these questions, we want to understand the client demographics, and so that it helps us to determine the client's household size and income, which can help us calculate the poverty status. So household size includes individuals that share income and expenses. And following this question, we ask whether the client received any type of public assistance. And here we define public assistance as any sort of means-tested work support that the client is receiving. And public assistance is usually available to individuals whose incomes are below a certain threshold. And some examples are food stamps, also known as SNAP, Medicaid, public housing, heating assistance, or cash payments, also known as TANF. Public assistance, within our definition, does not include benefits that are not determined based on income levels. So some examples would be FEMA or Medicare. Those would not be considered public assistance. The thing about public assistance is, again, it's a little bit of a tricky question, and it can be a little bit challenging to ask the client because they may refuse to answer this question. So really, the interviewer wants to make sure that the client feels comfortable so that they can answer this question. Because really, we're just trying to understand the demographics of the clients that the programs are serving. And in many cases, it's really important for the programs to see how many clients that have moved out of poverty as a result of the services that they received from the program. So the next set of questions, question 35, really is asking about the different forms of income that the client receives, and we've broken it down from A through I to kind of give provide guidance to the interviewer as they're asking this question. Because when you ask a client just in general what their income is, it's hard for them to necessarily provide that information. So we've broken it up from A through I to help the client figure out what type of income that they've received in 2016 and what type of source of income that they've received. So the next set of questions are about savings and healthcare. Question 37 asks if the client was able to save any money in 2016. And we're not asking if they ever saved any money, but specifically we want to know if they saved any money in 2016. And then questions 38 and 39 are asking about if the client had health insurance in 2016, as well as the source of their health insurance. So the final three questions are open-ended. Here we're asking clients to tell us if there are any additional services they'd like to see that the programs can provide, as well as any additional comments. There's also a question asking the client to provide additional contact information if they were to move. You're going to actually skip that question. This is sometimes used for programs that are interviewing their clients internally. But this is a question the Nielsen folks, interviewers will be skipping, and you'll see a strike through or a line through that question in the script as well. So that's the conclusion of the interview. I'm going to pause to see if folks have questions, and then I'm going to move on and do a demo of the Excel workbook.
Jasmine, Devin, do you guys have any questions?
Nope, not at this time. Everything's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
I think the biggest help, Labby, will be the glossary you were referring to.
Yep.
And if we can, would it be possible for us to get the deck and maybe even the recording?
Yes, absolutely. I plan to share that with you.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Okay.
So now I'm going to switch over to the Excel workbook. So just give me a second. I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. And in a minute, you should see the Excel workbook. Okay, let me know if folks are seeing the Excel workbook in front of them. It should just say Entrepreneur Tracker. Are folks seeing the workbook?
Yeah, this is Beth. I can see it. Sorry, I forgot I was on mute.
Oh, no worries. Great. Okay, so this is what the workbook looks like. This is the first page of it. most of this information is irrelevant to you. This will be filled out by the program. However, on the second page, the organizational data page, you will probably need to fill out the number of completed interviews section, because this will help the programs know how many surveys were completed before you send this workbook to them. The next tab is the intake input page. You don't need to worry about this. I'll give you a little bit of background about this page, but again, this is something that Nielsen doesn't need to focus on. You won't be working on this particular section. So the intake input page is actually data that's pulled from the program's intake forms, and so they will be doing this separately from the survey data that Nielsen will be collecting. So that's why this is in here, but it's not relevant to the work that Nielsen will be doing. What is relevant is the survey input page. So this is a page I was talking about earlier in the webinar, where you will be, the interviewers will be filling out data on each client. And as you can see, I'm showing you sort of the drop-down menus for many of these questions. And again, you want to make sure you add the client ID number. It's really important that we have the right client ID attached to the correct client. And then you're going to fill out this form, and at the very bottom, you're going to hit this Store This Data button. And when you hit this button, this form empties out into the data editing page. So you're going to see, so that one form is going to be one row here of data. So that entire client's data will show up as one row here. So as the Nielsen folks use this, they can input data for each client, and you'll continue to empty it out, and it'll go into that data editing page. So there's actually two options here. You can, your interviewers can either type in the data as they're interviewing the client into this form, or if they want, they can use the survey tool print and just print out the survey and fill everything out on a hard copy, and later on come back and fill in the survey input page. We found that many programs prefer using the hard copy, and I think that's what Nielsen did the last time Nielsen conducted the survey, but correct me if I'm wrong. In any case, either or is fine, as long as whatever's more comfortable for their interviewers. But at the end, you just want to make sure that the data is filled in here and all of it is on this data editing page. So that's the survey input and the survey toolprint page. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this data editing page. So when you get on this page, you're going to see all of these columns that are going to be empty for you. So this is all the data related to that intake input page that I mentioned earlier, which is data that the programs themselves are going to be pulling from their intake forms. But for Nielsen, the only relevant columns are column F, which is where the client ID will be entered, and you'll see that once you've entered the survey data. And after column F, the columns that are relevant are columns AE onwards, because this is where the survey data starts. So from column AE to column EH is where you're going to see the data that you input into this page. So don't feel alarmed if you see nothing in any of these earlier columns, because that data is not relevant to what Nielsen is doing. And one way to just simply remember where the survey data starts is you'll see there's this purple column here, and that should tell you, that should give you a marker of, okay, this is where the survey data we've entered is going to be recorded. And you're going to spend a lot of time on this data editing page, because this is where you're going to be able to see all of the data listed, and you'll be able to filter and check for data quality before you send it to the programs at the end of the survey campaign. And the very last tab is the data cleaning page. Don't worry about this page at all. This is something that the Aspen Institute uses internally to do our own data cleaning and data review. So really your focus is going to be on this data editing page, column AE and onwards. And of course, this first column, column F, which provides the client ID number. So I realized I went through that pretty quickly. I'm just going to pause and stay on this Excel workbook to see if folks have any questions, and I can move through the tabs if there are any questions on any specific tabs.
Hi, Lavi. It's Beth again.
Hi.
The inputting and the tabs are very straightforward, but I really appreciate you going through to kind of tell us what we do need to worry about in the tabs that we can ignore, so thank you very much for that.
Yep.
And I'm going to regroup with Ben. He was on for a little bit. He had to drop off for another meeting just to confirm how they inputted, the Nielsen call center inputted the data prior. Just to confirm to your question if they printed out the sheets and then filled it in later. So we'll take care of that and look into that on our end just to make sure that, you know, from your perspective and everyone's perspective, that they're receiving the data in the same format that they have always.
Right. And I mean, I can say that a lot of the programs find it easier to print out the form and fill it out, the hard copy out, and later put in the survey input and put it into the survey input form. And the other thing that allows is if there are any questions about the survey data later on, then you can always go back to the hard copy survey to see and double check a particular data point.
Okay, sounds good. I appreciate you kind of calling that piece out.
Yep. And are there any questions on the data editing page as well? As I mentioned, don't worry about the data cleaning page. That's an internal thing. If you see any highlighted things, don't worry about it. Just focus on the data editing page. And again, you know, don't worry about not seeing any data show up in some of these first columns because that's going to be irrelevant. That's data that the programs are going to be providing. You're really going to be focusing on the survey data, which starts in column AE.
That's great. And the behind the scenes, the macros that are running in this file, this is where it takes the input and puts it into the labels, correct?
Correct, exactly.
Okay.
So all of this data, so as you, for example, type in one client's information into here, you hit this store this data button, this form empties out and goes into one row here.
And that was my next question. If once you hit that submit button, does it empty out and allow you to just keep entering in? Perfect. That was my other question.
Exactly. It'll empty out. All of it will go into this data editing page, and then you can fill in the next client's information in the survey input form.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So at the end, depending on how many clients, let's say you have 1,000 clients for one of the programs, you'll see 1,000 rows of data in this data editing page. And just another quick tidbit, this particular workbook that we sent allows up to 4,900 rows of data. So you can put in 100 rows of 200, and it goes up to 4,900. And if your team is having any issues with the workbook, please let me know, and we're happy to talk through it and fix any errors that you notice.
Great. Wonderful.
Okay. So I'm just going to go back to our slides. I've just put up my contact information, which you should already have, but just in case, my number and email is available. So feel free to contact me if your team has any questions as you are gearing up, and I'll work on that help sheet to provide the Nielsen folks.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Lavi. I really appreciate you going through this with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
Jasmine, do you have any final questions before we wrap up?
No, I'm good on my end. Thank you.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining me, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thanks so much, Lavi.
Yep. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Lavi.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.